Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jim Falk, the Interim Executive Director of the Santa Fe Council on International Relations. We're going to have a timely and important discussion today on the state of the Department of State. The dog days of summer generally are not known for news-breaking headlines, but you know too that that's not the case this year, is it? It's usually a time when diplomats take on new posts. Those in Washington go to Rehoboth or they go to Virginia Beach, or in the case of President Joe Biden, they go to Camp David for a bit of rest. Well, everybody's in Washington right now. Today's program features a panel of four distinguished experts on foreign policy who are frankly chomping at the bit to speak their minds. They also want to respond to your questions, so let me remind you to put them into the question box in your Zoom screen, and we'll work them into the conversation. We won't have a separate question and answer period at the end. But before I introduce our panel, let me remind you that here at CIR, we're offering a special membership rate through the month of August, 10% off on all levels of membership. And what do you get? You get some free programs, you get discounts, you get travel opportunities, you get to be with people who share your passion for international affairs. And most importantly, your tax-deductible contribution connects Santa Fe with our world. So let me introduce our panel. I think you all know Ambassador Vicki Huddleston very well. She's well known to our audiences, and she began her overseas experience as a Peace Corps volunteer in Peru. Vicki has had a wide-ranging career that included being head of the diplomatic special interest section in Cuba. She also served in Ethiopia, where she was chargé d'affaires, and she was ambassador to Madagascar and Mali. And she's the author of One Woman in Havana, a diplomat's chronicle of America's long struggle with Castro's Cuba. Welcome, Vicki, and you'll be very pleased to know that just about an hour ago, I ordered your book. So I'm looking forward to you autographing it for me. I want to now introduce David
Thank you.
Killian. Was nominated by President Obama to be our ambassador to UNESCO, a UN educational, scientific, and cultural organization, and he held that position for about 5 years from 2009 to 2014. And David brings to our discussion a different perspective. He worked on Capitol Hill. He was a professional staff member on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs with special attention to international operations, multilateral organizations, and the State Department. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Mark Asquino, one of my many new bosses here in my position as Interim Executive Director. Mark is the incoming president. He'll take on that responsibility in January. He's a retired FSO, just like Ambassador Huddleston, had a 3-decade career. He doesn't look that way, but he had a 3-decade career with the Foreign Service, serving in Latin America, Europe, Central Asia, and Africa. He was ambassador for 3 years to the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. And rounding out our panel is Rebecca Black, who brings the perspective of someone who did not work at the State Department. Most of her career has been in the development area, and she worked for USAID, the United States Agency for International Development. And what makes her participation particularly interesting today, she was the Deputy Mission Director in Afghanistan. She's also worked in Poland and Cambodia and Mali, and continues to work as an international consultant, as do, I think, most of our panel. So welcome to all of you. So, Rebecca, and I want to be sure, I'm counting on all of you to really mess it up. Let's have some real dialogue and some disagreement. That'll be fun to see. Afghanistan is clearly on everyone's mind. And even this morning, there's been just a horrible tragedy. What we heard might happen yesterday did happen today with a suicide bombing outside of the airport gates. So let's just start with this, and I am going to ask all of you, but Rebecca, you go first. How do you see the position that President Biden took on this accelerated withdrawal?
Thank you. And thank you to CIR for inviting me to join. It's always good for USAID, which is now, we have a seat on the NSC, so we feel, or I'm no longer with USAID, but USAID feels quite empowered by its equal role with development, with diplomacy and defense. But Afghanistan is clearly very emotional, very difficult, very tragic, very disturbing, I think, for everybody, particularly for those of us who worked there and for those who fought there. Very complicated situation. This morning's tragedy, just, I think, unfortunately, well, there will be a number of other events such as that. However, I don't think that really changes the big picture. So I worked, as Jim said, as the Deputy Mission Director for USAID from August 2009 to 2010. That was the time of the big buildup. Under the Obama administration, USAID was charged with hiring 300 people. In that 1 year, we did hire 300. We unfortunately had to fire about 25 of them, but massive increase of civilians in place, more than doubled the budget. So it was quite a big escalation. And frankly, at that time, I thought it could make a difference. That in fact, maybe the support for the Taliban in Afghanistan could really be reduced, and this could be over that way. Unfortunately, by the time I left in August of 2010, when General Petraeus had taken over from McChrystal, I really had lost confidence that that was true. And whether right or wrong to be there, the question was really, was it succeeding? And I think not. That was 10 years ago. Many lives, a lot of money lost since then. So I know people say, well, we should have kept a presence there. It wouldn't have cost that much. We could have maintained US interest. I'm not quite sure where that comes from. 3,000 civilians were killed in 2020. To me, that's a pretty high cost. That's more than what was lost in 9/11. So that would continue with the conflict. This question of terrorism, maintaining a secure space to prevent further terrorist attacks. It seems that terrorist attacks and cells are developing in all parts of the world, certainly Mali, Niger, never were before, now they are, Yemen, Albania at one point. So I'm not sure that Afghanistan is any more prone to that. I would think the Taliban isn't particularly interested in inspiring a lot of attacks on international countries, because it'll just bring more problems for them. So I'm not sure that's a great argument either.
Well, Rebecca, let me hear to see if anybody disagrees with you about the fact that we need to have a presence there to counter terrorism. We interviewed Ryan Crocker a few days ago, as many of you know, and he took a very strong position that we have to maintain a military presence. Anybody agree with Ryan?
I thought maybe I'd let Rebecca finish, since we're colleagues. Well, we weren't in Mali at the same time, but we share Mali and we're friends. But my opinion is diametrically opposed to Rebecca's in this case. But let me let Rebecca finish so that I can try to answer some very good arguments that she's making.
But we're trying to work everybody in, and we have a time commitment. But go ahead, Rebecca, if you can.
All right, well, just a few other points. I think the other issue around protecting women, many of us worked very hard for the sake of women and girls to give them opportunities. They were expanded. At the same time, more than 3 million kids are out of school, 60% of which are women, because of the conflict and because of cultural norms. Frankly, we have not changed a lot of the cultural norms that are problems for women. That military can't do that. So a lot of good was done. A lot of schools, midwives trained, farmers learned to grow different crops, but essentially the governance never improved. I don't think there's a government that people really were willing to support. There is not a case where a foreign country has been able to help develop a democratic country. It just doesn't work for a foreign country to try and take over. And the presence of the US was so rich and so wealthy, I think it just inspired animosity. We lived a fiction. There are a lot of less support than what was reported back. And I think it just would have continued to create problems for the US to have our presence there. I don't begrudge our soldiers any protection, but when you have somebody walking around with $500,000 worth of equipment on them and you have people who don't have shoes, it's just never going to work very well. It's never going to build up confidence. And it's too complicated a country to I was fortunate to fly all over the country when I was there. It's very mountainous, it's desert, it's really impossible to maintain a secure military presence. And it just hasn't worked. So I think ultimately for me, it's just time to say, we didn't make this work. I think as you mentioned on Friday, the report from the Special Investigator General for Afghanistan Reconstruction pointed out many problems with the efforts there. Ultimately, they didn't ask the important question, which is it possible for a foreign country to really rebuild and secure another country? And Afghanistan would probably be one of the most difficult, but it's never been done anywhere else either. So I don't really think it's possible, very unfortunately.
Rebecca, how much money have we spent, USAID spent, say, in the last 10 years?
In Afghanistan, I'm not up to date on the numbers. I know that overall U.S. government contribution to Afghanistan was $2 trillion. At the same time, it remains the 169th poorest country in the world, despite 20 years of U.S. assistance. It's at least $2 billion that's been spent on humanitarian and development assistance. And it still remains some of the lowest maternal health, education status, and poverty status in the world.
All right, let's hear from Ambassador Huddleston.
Oh, thank you. And I'm really sorry that we can't be here together as we had planned. And I appreciate people tuning in, despite the fact it's yet another virtual event. I couldn't agree more with Tony Blair. And Tony Blair said, I might get it a little bit wrong, that to have left Afghanistan because of the imbecilic political slogan of forever wars was a huge mistake, and it leaves us in a terrible position. And this is not a quote for him, but part of what he said vis-a-vis China and Formosa. It shows China that we're not willing to stay in a country when our interests are involved. In regard to terrorism, while we were there, terrorism with ISIS and Al-Qaeda wasn't a huge issue. As you can see, ISIS has already demonstrated that it can reconstitute itself in Afghanistan. And the idea that the Taliban won't or will keep their promise not to allow Al-Qaeda to attack the United States is just another example of you can't negotiate with terrorists because the Taliban is completely intermarried and interlocked with the Taliban. The new Minister of Defense, alas, happens to be a former detainee at Guantanamo. There's another example of this idea, and I blame Trump mainly for this, of negotiating with terrorists. We forced the Afghan government to release 5,000 Taliban, which included undoubtedly Al-Qaeda. But for me, we had more or less won the war. How can you say that? Well, we had Kabul, we had all the major capitals, we had most of the territory. We had 2,500 troops there. We had no casualties in the last year. Our allies were completely content with the situation. We have 2,500 US troops in East Africa. We have another 2,500 troops in West Africa because of terrorism and trying to support those governments. And we do it with our allies. We weren't in a forever war. We had basically succeeded. And then we decided, oh, we're not happy. We want to leave. So we walked out when we could have stayed, and over time reduced the dependence of the Afghan government on our contractors and on ourselves to be able to fight, and pulled out slowly our contractors, our diplomats, and our military. One of the things I don't understand about the chaotic and disastrous departure is we pulled out the military first. Well, how does that work? The military should stay until the civilians are gone. So it seems to me everything in Afghanistan is backwards. We had a success and we ignored the forever war slogan. We could have pulled down in a couple of years and left Afghanistan in a more or less not great state, but one in which we wouldn't have had a chaotic retreat, and in one in which Al-Qaeda and ISIS would not have gained strength, and one in which the United States would not have lost so much of its international prestige.
Mark, I want to ask you, because you have worked in so many different countries around the world, how is our withdrawal and the way this was handled going to affect our relations with some of our allies?
Well, first of all, thank you. Happy to be here and happy to have all of these people join us. Anything I will say are personal views, don't work with the US government, do not reflect CIR. I want to go back a little bit to a couple of things that Vicki said, because I do disagree with her. When Vicki says we in terms of controlling territory, et cetera, what was the situation of the Afghan government? How much control did they have over that territory? What sort of future were they providing for people? It was an incredibly corrupt government. We had been there for 20 years. And one of the few good things that came out of the agreement that the Trump administration made with the Taliban was that our troops were not attacked. So that is why we didn't have casualties. Had we not honored pulling out, that would have been affected. And so I don't see us giving an open-ended commitment. We would have had to increase our troops there, certainly, had we wound up having to prop up the government again without the agreement. In terms of the larger issue of relations with the region, I think the US will continue to have a strong role in Central Asia, in the Pacific. That will not change. We have been bogged down for 20 years in Afghanistan. I think in many ways the resources we have can be used for anti-terrorism and monitoring. And I think if there are attacks coming out of Afghanistan, we certainly will respond. I think there are real issues for countries like Pakistan and China, which no longer have us there. The Taliban are not their friends, given the issues that they have within their own countries. So I don't see this as a long-term defeat for the United States. I see it as an adjustment. I would agree with Vicki. The situation we have on the ground now is one that is chaotic and tragic, but we are getting people out. We probably will have more than 100,000 people out. And I think sometimes we have to look at the positives, look at the achievements of the US military on the ground, as well as our diplomatic colleagues. And I will stop there because I am sure that David has some thoughts on all of this.
Exactly. Let's hear from you, David.
Thanks, Jim, and it's great to be here. I do have some thoughts, but I would first say that I agree with Rebecca. I think that Afghanistan is a place where great powers go to die. I mean, we have a long history to look at, including the British adventure in Afghanistan, and of course, the Soviet Union's misadventure there, where a lot of people would say it contributed to the beginnings of the unraveling of their empire. But I would say that I do think there are limited cases where the United States has been very effective in rebuilding societies and democracies. I mean, the Marshall Plan in Germany and Japan come to mind, and Korea. And more recently, I was the chief of staff of the Helsinki Commission after the fall of the Soviet Union. I think the United States made a big contribution to the development of societies and economies and democracies in Central Europe, Eastern Europe. But I'd like to pick up on one thing that Vicki said that I think a lot of our listeners might be thinking about. How is it that the withdrawal was so badly botched? And what does it say about the Biden administration's foreign policy planning? And, I go to that key meeting that the administration had of all of its foreign policy principles on April 24th. And the meeting was held on the Pentagon, in DOD's turf, in what's called the extreme basement of the Pentagon. And of course, the Secretary of Defense was there, all the generals, all the leading political appointees at the State Department, and Tony Blinken, who joined, he wasn't there in presence, he joined by teleconference. And, the military announced in that meeting that they were going to have a complete and decisive withdrawal, They didn't want any vulnerable forces left. And that meant closing Bagram Air Force Base, which they did on July 2nd in an abrupt way. And at that same meeting, state declared that it was going to stay. And they were determined to keep the embassy open and staffed by 1,400 Americans. But, you know, apparently in that meeting, nobody negotiated to work out the contradiction in the endgame approaches. Nobody stood up for state to DOD to ensure security and a viable evacuation plan if the situation deteriorated. And I'm sorry, I just don't buy that it was impossible for them to think about the situation deteriorating. It just doesn't pass the laugh test. I would say, though, that Tony Blinken was very new to being a principal. He was 3 months on the job as Secretary of State. He'd been a staffer up until 2021. He didn't even run the National Security Council in the Obama administration. He was Susan's deputy. He only participated in this meeting by video link. And I think Tony probably wasn't prepared to question the generals and to push back on Austin and Miley and push back hard. And of course, you know, many of us know that for many years there was a wizard behind the scenes at the State Department named Pat Kennedy, and he's the one that set up our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I don't think there was any Pat Kennedy in the room that day for the State Department. I don't think there was any experienced logistics principal from the State Department with a history of understanding what could go wrong and what was needed to support State Department operation in a place like Afghanistan in the face of an abrupt US military withdrawal. And I think Pat's stand-in in the meeting was probably played by Brian McEwen, who's the #3 person at the State Department. He's the Deputy Secretary for Management, and he was Biden's longtime lawyer on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was in the White House and Department of Defense during the Obama administration. And his current job is literally his first ever job at the State Department. And as a result, I don't think he was prepared to stand up to the generals either. He'd only been in the job for a little over a month. And of course, Jake Sullivan, I would assume, and John Feiner were there, the National Security Advisor and his deputy. But like Blinken, neither one of them have been principals. They're youngish, they're in their early 40s. And you know, I grew up with these people. I worked with them on Capitol Hill. And I would say that, you know, all of them, Tony, Brian, Jake, John, none of them have very sharp elbows. So I don't think there was any effective counterweight to what the generals wanted to do, to depart abruptly and square it with what state wanted to do, which was maintain a large embassy. And obviously that was an incredible foreign policy blunder.
Well, we
Yeah,
can.
but I just-
Yeah, go ahead, Rebecca.
I think one place we all agree is that it's really important to get out the Americans and all of the Afghans who supported the US government effort. I think that's critical to maintain our reputation overseas, that we do stand by the people that helped us. So there is I think a hard 31st date, but there's still other ways of helping people get out. And so I think for us to continue to pressure our representatives to whomever to help get people who need to get out of Afghanistan out. I also just wanted to say to David that I worked in Eastern Europe for 6 years and do think the US played quite a good role. Those were countries that wanted to go at the same place we did. There was an interview with a soldier, the Afghan soldier, in the New York Times today, and he said the reason that they did give up fighting, but that was because of the disparaging remarks by Biden. It's an Afghan soldier. Why would the president of the United States stop an Afghan soldier from fighting for his country? I think that just shows that the relationships were all messed up. They were fighting for the US, not for Afghanistan. So, and I just don't think that works. It's a very different situation from certainly working in Poland and Hungary and Czech Republic in the 90s.
Let me bring in this question from Guy Gronquist. And David, I think he's touching on something you said. He asks, did the expected difficulty of confirming Susan Rice and some others lead to the nomination of JV squad members, leading to the results we're seeing now? And that gets to one of the things we did want to talk today about, is the issues with confirmation process. Mark, why don't you take that?
Yes, I'd be happy to. The administration, first of all, on confirmations got off to a very slow start. And that was unfortunate. They, to date, as of today, have only made 57 nominations of ambassadors. And they have run into the formidable Ted Cruz, who is blocking, is putting holds on nominations because he wants the administration to change its policy on Nord Stream, which is a pipeline from Russia to Germany, which is 95% finished. The Biden administration has decided, even though there are issues with Ukraine supplying oil, that it is not going to take a stand, it's not going to reverse. I think the other thing that I have found that has been somewhat disturbing are some of the nominations. Let's start with Carolyn Kennedy to Australia. Carolyn Kennedy previously was in Japan. If you look at the inspection report from 2015, she got a terrible review in terms of her leadership. Had any other ambassador been done the way she was, I can assure you, I was an ambassador in 2015, I would not have gotten another posting. There are nominations such as Rahm Emanuel to Japan, someone who was abrasive, terrible choice. I can go on, but right now, 54% of all of the nominations have been non-career. And this goes against something that Joe Biden said when he went to the State Department right after his election, that he was going to put the State Department and diplomacy back in the hands of professionals. And that has been disappointing because I think what we are seeing in some cases are political payoffs. Jeff Flake going to Turkey, Cassetti going to India. So that aspect of it, I think, is not good. And a lot of the assistant secretaries are also non-career. Getting back to what David was saying about Tony Blinken, my thought on that is when Hillary Clinton became the Secretary of State, the decision was made to give her a deputy who handled just at the top level policy, not policy issues, administrative issues. It was Tom Nides who has been appointed to go to Israel. And I think it is a terrible error for the reasons that David is saying, that Tony Blinken does not have someone who knows how to run things sitting right down the hall from him. We have a bunch of policy wonks, and I have nothing against policy, but Pat Kennedy was the person who made everything click, everything run. And now that you have someone who doesn't have those skills, and you don't have another person like Tom Nides, who brought tons of experience to being the administrative person, that is a major problem.
Well, let's turn to the State Department more and focus on it. There have been, prior to President Biden took office, there had been major studies done by the Council on Foreign Relations, by the Belfer Center at Harvard, about how to reform the State Department. And it doesn't look like a whole lot has happened. Let me go first to Vicki. And Rebecca, I'm going to go to you too in a minute to ask you about how USAID has reformed itself if needed. But Vicki, what is needed at the State Department? And has any progress been made? And you were on mute.
Thank you. Well, we don't have Trump. And so morale has to improve immediately because things are not happening, shoot from the hip. North Korea is our friend, shake their hand at the border one day, the next day or the day before, we're going to blow them up. We're not denigrating our allies. We're talking about how to deal with some of these really crucial issues like climate change, like cyber, like artificial intelligence, like arms control. So I believe that there's a lot going right on the policy side at the State Department. I agree with Mark. It's too bad we're seeing too many political appointees, although I'm not at all surprised. Biden's an old politician. He has a lot of people to pay back. and ambassadorships are unfortunately the way that you often do it. He has actually put in a number of career people like Assistant Secretary, not confirmed because of Cruz, for Africa, Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere, and some of the other geographic assistant secretaries are indeed foreign service officers. Biden clearly has trust in the State Department. Blinken's there, Bryan's there. his old staffers are there. But this point that David made is critical. Where are the Rusk? Where are the Marshalls? Where are the heavyweights in foreign policy that, get out there and say, hey, this is the way it has to be. You have to fight with defense. Defense promotes its own interests. Some would say defense lies. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense. I don't know whether they lie, but people don't understand always what defense does. And so the way they present it sounds right, but then you find out that maybe you had just been fooled. And I have to say, I've been fooled by defense in my time, even when I worked for them, because they have beautiful ways around. So you really need a very strong person with sharp elbows. A lot of people had qualms about Susan Rice, who's a close friend, but Susan has sharp elbows. Rest assured, those generals wouldn't have gotten much past Susan. But this was pointed out very early on, that Biden had put in place people who were aides, advisors, not people who got along with each other, not people who were really principals and knew how to defend
what I want us to address is some of the issues that the State Department has had for years. And Mark, we have a question from one of our viewers on this. And, the State Department has had that rap of being male, pale, and Yale. And we hear from Lisa, who says, how do we improve the recruitment of the new Foreign Service officers so that the State Department can attract and retain a more diverse cadre of officers? And just to highlight that, in the Trump administration, I think there are for a period of time, only two African-American ambassadors.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. One of the first things that Tony Blinken did, and he spoke about this during his confirmation hearing, was to increase diversity. He nominated, and actually she didn't have to be confirmed, highly respected Foreign Service officer by the name of Gina Abercrombie Winstanley. And she is the first officer to serve as a chief diversity and inclusion official within the government. She reports directly to him. This is something positive. Gina is African American. She's been a mentor to women, to minorities. I know her personally. She was ambassador to Malta. But how much power will she have to make a difference? That is a big question. There was a study done by Harvard at the Belfort Center after Tony Blinken came into office, saying that morale is still not good. There are a large number of Foreign Service officers who are still thinking about leaving. And some of the issues that they have brought up as they've looked at this is that State Department is not family friendly. There is not enough flexibility for employment of spouses and support. The other thing that they bring up is reform of the assignment process, which is who you know in order to advance. And people are not happy about that. They have brought up accelerating the number of promotions. And finally, they come back to this question of diversity, that this new diversity officer has to be empowered. She has to have power to do this. So these are all things that are important. The number of people taking the Foreign Service test has not greatly increased in this administration. So these are all concerns. I mean, things are not tremendously happy in that aspect when you look at the state of the State Department right now. But Vicki's right. It is immensely better than it was under Trump and under Tony Blinken. Tony Blinken is trying to increase the number of Foreign Service officers. He's pushing to expand the budget. That's just the opposite of what Tillerson and Pompeo were doing.
Let me ask Vicki or Mark this question. so many Foreign Service officers did resign during the Trump administration. Is there a way for them to come back in a lateral way?
Well, some of them have already been appointed, and the ones we're talking about were mainly seniors. A lot of the seniors who had been ambassadors were fired or let go. You have to have another job after you've been an ambassador in the next 30 to 60 days. But more than just Gina, who's the diversity officer, a Black officer career is named to be the Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere. I believe the Director General nominee is a woman who's Black. Isn't that Marcia? There are quite a few Black officers and women. Women are doing fine, I would say, in the Foreign Service. As for the other officers, the lower level that left, I believe they're looking at a program for reentry. I think they're also looking at programs so that people can come into the Foreign Service at different levels, and this might be good for the Foreign Service as well.
Rebecca,
I mean,
what's
my
happening
answer
today?
to that would
ahead,
be
Mark.
no, unfortunately. I came back as a rehired annuitant after I left the State Department. I decided that I should step down because I became a volunteer for the Biden campaign on Africa. And I have wanted to go back to do some things at the State Department. I am part of an enormous backlog that diplomatic security is sitting on right now. And so even for someone like me, who spent years in the State Department, came back as what they call a rehired annuitant, it's very difficult. It's slow. It's bureaucratic. The State Department structure is antiquated. And that's what all of the reports have said. And what we need is a new Foreign Service Act. The last one was in 1980 when we were all dancing disco. We need to look at a Foreign Service for the 21st century. And I do not see that happening with this administration. And for me, that's very disappointing.
Rebecca, give me 2 minutes on what's happening at USAID.
Well, I'm start as a context. The 21st century is going to be a century of a battle of ideas. I think there are a lot of very complex issues, authoritarian regimes, the presence of China, which certainly would like to see a world that looks like it, taking over, climate change, migration, lots of complicated issues that require diplomacy, development, and defense to work together. So it's really critical that that relationship, that all those organizations are functional and working well together. USAID, I think the importance of assistance is represented by the fact that Samantha Powers was the nominee. She's unfortunately the only confirmed nominee for USAID. All of our bureaus are headed, all USAID's bureaus are headed by political appointees, and none of those have been filled yet. So the same problem. But the presence of her plus the seat on the NSC, I think really indicates the intent of the administration to recognize how important it is to have that kind of coordination going on. USAID was different in the first 3 years of the Trump administration. It had a very good administrator who believed in the agency, understood it, understood development. That was Mark Green. And I think morale was substantially higher. People working in aid would say they're in a little bubble compared to the rest of Washington. That changed the last year. Samantha Powers coming in, I think, has added a great enthusiasm back into the agency. AID has been able to continue to hire, is on target to reach its goal of 1,850 Foreign Service officers by the end of the year. 2/3 of the new hirees are people who identify as non-white and are women. So I think in terms of diversity, USAID has been able to do a really great job and very intensive outreach and commitment to that. So that will change the face and the operations of USAID. They also recognize, I think, as State Department did a while ago, that you need 2 deputies, one for policy and one for organization. Otherwise, the deputy is always drawn into policy issues. So Congress has given the nod to USAID to hire, to have a second deputy position. There are nominees that have been put forward. They haven't been confirmed yet. So there was a reorganization under Mark Green that was completed and being in the process of being implemented. So far, there's no dramatic shift in direction, right? We all know that Samantha Powers is very committed to human rights and humanitarian assistance, but so far that is still balanced with the development agenda, which frankly, some of us were quite worried about. So there haven't been major shifts, except obviously bringing back the word climate change into activities, support for women's reproductive rights and health, and some of those very political issues.
Good.
So I think USAID is very pleased as an agency to be a stronger partner with State Department and Defense, and really hopes that it's hard for an agency that hasn't been working with NSC because it takes a lot of paperwork, a lot of infrastructure. USAID is about the 12th of the size of State Department, so it's a bit of an unfair balance in terms of being prepared for those meetings, but I think that will come with time as they put the infrastructure in place. I think overall the USAID's picture is maybe somewhat better. It's a small agency. It's always gotten high marks in the federal surveys for commitment to the purpose, to poverty reduction and to national security. So I think aid continues to be driven by that, maybe continuing to be a bit behind on some of the more disciplined, getting things in on time, getting things done well and concisely has always been a bit of an issue for development people, but I'm sure that that's something Samantha Powers is working on and will with her new deputy focused on the organization.
Well, we got just about 20 minutes left, and I want to encourage people, if you have questions, to go ahead and enter it. And we have a very interesting note from Ambassador Deborah Jones that I encourage everyone to read, which underscores what Ambassador Asquino said about it. Her last sentence is, when she called the State Department to offer her services, thanks, but don't call us, we'll call you. That's not a good sign. David, one of the things that the Biden administration talked about was that they're going to re-engage in international organizations, multilateral organizations. How effective have they been? Are they doing that? And how has it been received?
Yeah, thank you again, Jim. I think looking at the whole picture, I'd have to give the administration a B or maybe a B- on multilateral engagement. Biden, of course, announced his retraction of Trump's very ill-conceived withdrawal from the World Health Organization on his first day in office. And then also on January 20th, he issued an executive order to have the US rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. He'd announced in November already that he was appointing former Secretary of State John Kerry as his special envoy on climate, and indicated that he'd give Kerry a seat on the National Security Council. So neither of these moves was in the least unexpected or particularly politically fraught for Biden, but carrying them out on January 20th sent a strong signal about US re-engagement. The next big US re-engagement announcement concerning international organizations concerned the UN Human Rights Council. Now that carries slightly more political risk and drama than the other two. It came a month later in February. The administration's rollout of this policy was interesting, and it was delivered with a slight stutter step. The initial announcement stated that the US would only be an observer at the council at first, seeking to weigh in on questions before the council and introduce new resolutions through our allies. But by the end of February, just 3 weeks later, the administration announced that it would run for a seat this year. The president's budget request, of course, was delivered in late May, and it didn't perhaps contain everything the UN Foundation and Antonio Gutierrez would have wanted, but it fully funded all the UN accounts, and in addition, it requested $300 million as a down payment for our more than $1 billion of debt to the United Nations for peacekeeping operations. The most tentative area for the Biden administration's re-engagement with the international system, the UN system in particular, so far, has been concerning an account that's really near and dear to my heart, UNESCO. So the US is barred from funding UNESCO by a very old law that prevents the funding of any UN agency that that Palestine is granted membership to. And UNESCO triggered this law in 2010. It's a fascinating law. My colleagues from the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee Nobody knows of any other law in the history of Congress that ties the president's hand and provides no waiver. But this law does that. It provides no waiver. The administration actually appears to be quite intimidated in the politics of orchestrating U.S. reentry into UNESCO, even if it is apparently their will to do it. So believe it or not, although the Biden budget included a request for authorizing language to break through that law to enable the president to waive the statute, the administration literally tried to hide this provision. They inserted it below a fisheries section in their long list of legislative authorities requests with no title and no reference. AIPAC, of course, uncovered Biden's stealth UNESCO strategy and got 8 Jewish Democrats to go to International Organizations Appropriations Subcommittee Chair Barbara Lee from California and threaten her if she included the UNESCO provision in her bill. So Lee dropped the provision. Pat Leahy, who's unbelievably committed to UNESCO, is going to try to carry Biden's water on UNESCO in the Senate and through the conference process. But it's not clear that the administration has any will to fight on this difficult political issue, which was very characteristic of the Obama administration as well. Sometimes I think of the Bush foreign policy as Obama 3. And so in conclusion, with my grade of B or maybe B+, the commitments to international organization is very real, but it has serious limits.
David, let me ask you this. We've been seeing a rise of China taking leadership position in UN agencies. They actually lead, I think, now in 4 of them: the International Civil Aviation Organization, Telecommunications Union, Food and Agricultural Organization, UN Industrial Development Organization. These are agencies that probably most of us have never heard of, but what does that really mean in the big scheme of things?
Well, China clearly thinks it means a lot. They think that that they are going to be the great power of the future, maybe even the unipolar power of the future, and they see the UN system as a way to further their influence in all ways. At UNESCO, for example, they've been chomping at the bit for years to take over education at UNESCO. They want their education system to be a global force. And that's one of the things that I've worried about in this period that we've been withdrawn from UNESCO, that UNESCO literally helps all developing countries develop their education system, their public education system. It's a place where the United States has to be, and it can't be a place where we let China fill in and fill up the vacuum we've created.
So we have a comment and a question from Scott Bunton, and he recognizes that all of you have talked about this imbalance, if you wish, between the military, the generals, and the State Department. So the question is, do you have any suggestions regarding how this imbalance can be reduced so that state can be more effective in ensuring that its perspective and mission are heard and respected? Or is it just unavoidably a matter of Secretary Blinken and the new team at the State Department gaining confidence and assertiveness? Vicki, go ahead.
Well, the State Department has the responsibility for policy, and DOD is secondary to the State Department on this. And when I was at DOD, State Department reminded me of this daily. So there's the issue. There's no doubt who has primacy. Can Blinken and his team live up to that? And they've just gone through a terrible time, so we'll see. But I very much wanted to add this one point. It seems to me that Biden has done well where it's been Biden's policy. Where Biden hasn't done well, for me, and I know a number of people with me on the panel don't agree, is when he's followed Trump's policies, i.e. Afghanistan, keeping the same negotiator, negotiating with a terrorist organization, in my view, the Taliban. Cuba, deciding that you just leave in place the Trump sanctions so that Cubans increasingly are in dire straits for medicine and food. China the business council leader for the United States and China and the United States, and they were hoping that we would see a difference here, some more efforts to find common ground and to reduce some of the tariffs and trade blockages Trump put on. So I fear that it's both not only a Trump policy, but it's also a desire to appease certain groups, and David made that pretty clear in his presentation. And I hope Biden gets away from that, because the State Department will only be supreme in policy if Biden has policies that they can effectively implement. It's up
And
to the
Mark, you're on mute, but before, there you go, you're off. You know, maybe I shouldn't disagree with Ambassador Huddleston on this, but as an outside observer, it looks to me like the military has a better seat at the table, at least has certainly in the Trump administration, than the Department of State.
Let me just give you a few statistics, which are fascinating. There are 1.4 million men and women active duty, 718,000 civilians within the Department of Defense. If you count everybody in the State Department, it's about 50,000. And as Bob Gates used to say during the Obama administration, there actually are more people in military bands than there are diplomats. That's a sad fact. I don't think it's changed. There is one positive thing that I find about this administration. They are working closely with Congress, and David can weigh in on this, but Chris Murphy, Chris Van Hollen, a couple of people in the House are sponsoring something called the Investing in 21st Century Diplomacy. And this would add $12 billion to the budgets, both of US aid and state. It would be a 20% increase. You have to put in perspective that the Department of Defense's budget is 13 times bigger than the Department of State's. So some of it is funding, which the past administration tried to cut. They tried to reduce under Tillerson the number of both civil servants and foreign service people. So I am encouraged, because this bill, if it goes through, would give state 1,200 more officers. And right now there are fewer than 14,000 State Department officers, foreign service. And that's just a pathetic amount when you think of the fact that we have 200 missions more or less around the world. But again, it's a step in the right direction, but David knows how difficult it is to get anything through Congress. And I don't know the prospects on this one, David. What do you think?
Well, I would say, it's not just Chris Van Hollen and Chris Murphy that are fighting for more resources for the State Department and for foreign affairs in general in our budget. I think the Biden budget request was very good. They requested a plus up of about 12% in the entire foreign affairs budget. And there were plus ups in all the State Department accounts, including the accounts that would fund State Department operations and pay for more foreign service officers. So I think the situation is very promising. I think it's an incredible asset to Biden that Pat Leahy is the chair of the Appropriations Committee. Pat Leahy is a real friend of the State Department and a real friend of foreign affairs in general and foreign affairs vis military spending. So Pat's going to do everything he can. Nita Lowey's gone on the House side, but Rosa DeLauro is very good. She's the chair. And Barbara Lee is very simpatico with what you're talking about. So I think it'll be tough. It's a 50-50 Senate, but I think you will see a major advancement for the funding of foreign affairs at the end of the day when we get through the messy budget process and the appropriations process.
David, is this a time for our members to contact their elected representatives and others?
Absolutely, that always helps. Foreign affairs, I lived it. The members weren't under pressure from their constituents to improve the State Department. And it's incredibly helpful when reach out to their senators and congressmen and tell them that they care about this.
That's good to hear. Mark, we have a question from Sheila, and maybe Vicki, you know the answer to this if Mark doesn't have the numbers at the tip of his fingers. How many employees were there at state at the beginning of the Trump administration, and how many at the end?
I know that with foreign service officers, there was about 1,000 member reduction. Some of them were forced out, some of them resigned, but there was a push under Tillerson to reduce it by greater numbers. I think Blinken is rebuilding. More people are coming in, but I think it probably dipped below 13,000. It is now closer up to 14,000. But we lost, as Vicki said, an awful large number of extremely good people, particularly at the mid-level and at the senior level. And that really hurts when you are trying to bring up a new generation of officers and mentor them and really move them into senior positions. But what do you think, Vicki?
Well, I agree with you. But one of the problems that the State Department is having, and aid has always had, in my opinion, is bureaucracy. And in aid, it was so bad because Congress had some kind of regulation or rule for just about everything AID did, and they spent a good deal of time reporting back to Congress, being investigated by Congress and the OIG. That's now happened to state. At least that seems to me in my recent interactions with state. It has become extremely bureaucratic. That's why Ambassador Jones, very senior experienced diplomat, says, well, they didn't want me because I didn't have a security clearance. Well, it takes a year to a year and a half to get a security clearance. It certainly shouldn't for someone like Ambassador Jones, who's only been out a year or two. But what's happened is after Benghazi, at least this is what a friend of mine in the State Department said he thought had happened, everything has been drawn back to Washington. So the field has much less authority than it used to have in the past. And I think this might have been really reflected in this letter that 23 diplomats in Kabul sent in the dissent channel to Blinken that said, you need to speed up the evacuation. This is not going well. That shouldn't have had to happen. It should be the people on the ground that are actually carrying this out, making the big decisions. But I fear that because of all this meeting at the NSC, which is good. I mean, Trump didn't do it at all, so he had no input. And it's good in that it keeps defense in its place and everybody has a say, but it's also bad because you have Washington making the decisions that probably should be made in the field.
Well, the other thing, Herb Thomas makes this comment in a question that because of what's happened in Afghanistan, it's just going to become more political. There'll be congressional hearings. And he says, despite what Ambassador Killian said, is it possible that Republicans will rally around the good job that the Department of Defense did with the evacuation and blame state for the chaos? Mark, you get the last word.
Well, one of the things that bothers me about all of this is that we have also surged diplomats to the airport, and they are working there day and night. And the charge d'affaires, Ross Wilson, who spoke for CIR not too long ago, is also there. And that is the sad thing, I think, sometimes, that the diplomats are forgotten in all of this, that they are doing an amazing job. And it pleased me the other day when President Biden was talking and he ended and said, God bless and protect our diplomats and our armed forces. And you don't hear that very often, but I hope that in these hearings, people recognize the role of diplomats because they are out there doing an amazing job.
Well, I want to thank all of you, and I don't want to, assign any ages to you, but as I think on this call with you, we have over a century's worth of service to the United States and into international relations. Want to thank all of our viewers for being with us, and you can always catch up and watch and share our past programs by going to our YouTube channel at CIR, Santa Fe Council on International Relations. Thanks for being with us, and tune in often, and we'll see you again very soon. Have a great weekend. It's not quite here, but it will be soon. Take care, everybody, and stay healthy.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks,
Bye.
panelists. Thanks, everyone.